There is nothing more unpredictable than draft night, and the Knicks are in the thick of things. Will they move out? Will they move back? Will they move up for the likes of Mr. Jaden Ivey? We are hours away from finding out. All right, what's up, beautiful people? You're watching the Putback with Ian Begley Draft Preview Live. I'm Chris Williamson alongside the one and only SNY NBA insider, Ian Begley. We are excited once again to be joined by Jonathan Macri. He is the one and only Dean of Knicks Film School, and we're happy to welcome a legend, Rafael Barlowe, to the show as well. He's Director of Scouting for NBA Big Board, been all over the world, scouting some great players, and we're streaming live on SNY.TV, as well as our Twitter, Facebook, and YouTube channels, and you can get your questions posted in the comment section. And as always, we tip things off with the baseline. So, Ian, honestly, we're hours away, obviously, from the first round of the NBA draft. What is the possibility in your eyes looking like that the Knicks move up into where exactly?
Yeah, I think it's going to be a heavy price to get up to 4, to get up to 5. You know, we know that they've checked in with the Kings, checked in with the Pistons, but I think that price is going to be significant. And so it could be posturing by the Kings and or the Pistons. Maybe they're going to just take it to the 11th hour and wait till when they're actually on the clock before they decide on which offer to take, particularly with the Kings. But there's a lot of teams interested in getting up there to 4. So the Knicks have competition in what packages they would put together. Like I think that there are a lot of teams calling Sacramento, but you look at big picture, at it in a big picture sense, the Knicks have the assets to get something done if they wanted to, right? They have the first round picks. They have the young players that Sacramento could then turn into a veteran player if that's the route they decided to go. I think it's just a matter of how much do you love Jaden Ivey? How much are you willing to part with if you're the Knicks? For Jaden Ivey, are you willing to part with Obi Toppin? Are you willing to part with Emmanuel Quickly or Quentin Grimes? How many picks? So that's a question I think will be bounced around the Knicks facility and Sacramento as we get closer to the draft.
Yeah, it's going to be very interesting to see how it all plays out. So many decisions, so many lives are about to be changed for this NBA draft. And obviously the path to a disgruntled superstar hasn't opened up, Ian. Free agency kind of has its limitations. So the draft really might be the place for the Knicks to get their next big superstar. Is now, in your opinion, the time to swing for the fences, or should they hold court and just play it like usual?
You know what? I think the time is now. I mean, whether it's Jaden Ivey or whether it's making a big trade for a free agent, making a trade to sign a free agent like Jalen Brunson, whatever it is, I think now is the time to make the play for this regime because you're coming off a 37-45 season here. And I think you need to kind of push things forward and you need to specify your direction, whether it's, hey, we're giving up assets to go get Ivy, we're going young and we want to see how this thing works out with these young guys, or whether it's, hey, we're gonna trade salaries, we're gonna get off salaries, we're gonna go get Jalen Brunson, and we feel like he can push us to the next level. You know, one way or another, I think it's time for this regime to make something happen, to take a big swing, because this is a pivotal season that they're going into, coming off a disappointing 21-22 year.
Yeah, because you don't want to stay flat. You don't want to stay in a mediocre lane. So you do have to, even though, you know, taking a big risk is obviously something that you have to calculate carefully. But in order to get, you know, the championship level, you have to make big moves that are obviously going to have some consequences, you know, if they don't work out. But if they do, you know, the payoff is much greater. Now, Jonathan, do you agree with Ian that this is the time to make that bold move in the NBA draft? Or do you want to see how you get the draft pick at 11 and then you see how everybody meshes together for another year?
With the caveat that, you know, you have to have done your legwork on Ivy. You have to know that he has the work ethic to make himself into a better passer, you know, better playmaker for others, to continue working on the jump shot, to continue working on the defense, all the things that are going to elevate him from a guy who is just a really tantalizing talent to a guy who could be, you know, a foundational offensive piece. With that caveat, if they believe that he has that, yes, I think the time is now. And I want to be very specific about this. You know, you just said it. Mediocrity is the last place you want to be in the NBA. It's, you know, you want to be at the top, you want to be at the bottom. And where the Knicks are right now, it's right in the middle. So it's not that Knicks fans aren't willing to have patience. We'll have all the patience in the world as long as there is a light at the end of the tunnel. And right now, and you know, you just brought it up with the disgruntled superstar thing. We're going to sit around and wait for Utah and Donovan Mitchell to whatever's going to happen there. If and when that happens, it's not going to be cheap. It's going to cost, I would assume, and Ian would know better than me, more than what it will cost to get Ivy now. Now, Ivy is obviously not as sure of a thing. To me, though, there's enough there to feel good about making the jump.
All right. I like it. You know what I'm saying? I think having that aggressive attitude can pay off if you have the right pieces in place. Now, going back to just looking at the entire draft, Rafael, what is the level of talent in this year's lottery section? And is there a certain point where you believe it drops a level where you're going from like really good to just good?
You know, I'm actually a fan of this class. I know a lot of people are saying it's maybe one of the weaker classes, but I'm a fan. I like the depth. I like the fact that from maybe 6 through 12, all of those guys are fluid. And then I feel like once you get from 13 through 35, there's really not that big of a difference. But I think this draft has at least 4 guys that could potentially be franchise players, and with Jaden Ivey being one of them. And if I'm the Knicks, I'm actually going all in on trying to get Jaden Ivey.
Okay. All right. So, that leads me to my next question. And remember, guys, you can get your questions in for Ian, Jonathan, Rafael, or everyone in the comment sections, no matter what platform you're on. But when it comes to Jaden Ivey and his attributes, Rafael, what does he specifically bring to the table? Clearly, one of them is his explosive first step, but there's more than that.
Yeah, I mean, just the intangibles. He plays hard. He competes. I actually just redid my big board, and I have him number 2. I have him over Jabari and Chet. So, and I'm a big Banchero guy. So I'm going against the consensus there. But I'm looking at this phenomenal athlete with this explosive first step that I think is going to thrive with NBA spacing. You look at the lineups he had at Purdue, he played with 2 traditional bigs. The Big Ten is a physical, grinded out conference. And if you give him NBA floor spacing, I think he's going to shine. I mean, he's so fast that he doesn't really even need a pick to get to the rim. And so I just think that he has all the tools to really just lift the team up.
Got a follow up for Rafael. But before I ask it, I want to say, if you are new to, Rafael and his work on the draft, go check the timestamps on his social media and look up Luka Doncic, because he was just telling us he was early on the Doncic train, well before probably you or anyone else had heard of Doncic. So go check that out. He's got strong credentials, and we appreciate his time. But Rafael, on Ivy, how do you feel about his ability to change speeds? I mean, does he have that at this point? Is that something he would need to work on at the NBA level?
Yeah, I don't think he has like the greatest pace or change of speeds. I think it's all 0 to 100, which Westbrook, I feel like is very similar. Westbrook only had 1 speed. Sometimes it's good, sometimes it's bad. He can be out of control a little bit, but I just think with his explosiveness and his relentlessness, that I think it can have more positives than negatives. But I would say that I would like to see him add a little bit more pace, which would help him as far as being able to like develop a floater in the mid-range game. Because right now it's either straight to the rack or shoot a 3. But I'm okay with it. I think that's something that can be developed.
Yeah. And obviously none of these guys are going to be finished products once they come into the NBA. But Jaden is obviously a special talent, 6'4", 200 pounds. Jonathan, all Big Ten first team last year, 17 points a game. Why do you think, given what you've seen from his game, he would fit so well with the Knicks system?
Well, actually, I don't know how to answer that, because I actually don't think he would fit great with the Knicks system as it is now. I think, and this may be a little bit of projecting on my part, but I think there's a segment within the Knicks that wants to play faster. I don't think you draft an Obi Toppin, and again, that was Leon's first pick, without some sentiment within the organization, like we want to play a certain way. Now, obviously, we haven't seen that, and we can get into the reasons why. Julius Randle kind of had the year he had 2 years ago, and they kind of went through him and played at a slower pace. I mean, if you're going to draft Ivy, I think you need to speed it up for one. I also think you need to have patience. And then the other part of it for me that's interesting, and Rafael would be better to speak to this than me, is this interesting conversation about, like, okay, if he's not ever going to be a traditional point guard, and he's going to have to play off guard, you're going to need to play him maybe with someone who sets the table. Is that okay? You know, we just witnessed this finals where I think the Celtics were knocked for having, you know, their two wings initiate the offense, and Marcus Smart is not, again, a traditional point guard, whatever the heck that even means these days.
Right.
So if you're going to be running your offense through Ivy, and he's not the level of playmaker of a John Morant, and I don't think he's ever going to get there. How do you build around that? I think it's actually a little bit trickier than maybe we're making it out to be. But it's a risk that I'm willing to take that they'll be able to figure it out.
Yeah, Rafael, what do you think about that? Like, how would he work with the scenario that Jonathan just brought up, as far as, you know, he's not a traditional point guard, you know, he'd be off the ball as a shooting guard. How do you think that would all play out?
I actually want to see him as the primary ball handler. I think with his speed, he doesn't have to have great vision. If he can just be a driving kick guy or just feed guys on dump offs like Westbrook did, I think he'll be fine. I think the biggest difference between like with Boston and with Ivy is Boston didn't have a point guard that could collapse the defense. And that's something that Jaden Ivey specializes in. So I think his speed and being able to get in the paint can create opportunities. He may not be the guy that's throwing live one dribble or a live dribble skip passes or anything like that. But I just think the basic driving kick, find a corner, dump offs, I think he can be fine in that role.
Okay. And Ian, is there anyone else that we know about Ivy, how there's a lot of talk and conversation about them moving up for him? Is there anyone else the Knicks would potentially trade up for, or is it just Ivy or bust? Like, that's it?
Yeah. So I had heard earlier this week that Shaden Sharp, had fans in high places within the organization. And then you look at Sharp and where he's projected to go ahead of where the Knicks are at 11. And so, you use logic. And I would think that if the Knicks are having conversations with teams, which they were earlier this week about moving up, I think Sharp was seen as a potential target if they couldn't get high enough to get Ivy. Now, I want to say that right now, I think that the price to get up there is very high, as I said earlier. So I think it's less likely than likely that the Knicks actually get something done to move up. And obviously it depends on, where Sacramento ends up, where Detroit ends up in terms of asking price. But the sense over the last, day or so was that the price was continued to be really high, and it was less likely for New York to get there. But when you talk about Sharp, obviously a player who, unless you follow the draft as closely as Rafael does, you don't know much about him because he sat out of his season at Kentucky. But the Knicks, we all know the ties with the Kentucky program between Leon Rose, William Wesley, John Calipari, et cetera, et cetera. So I would assume that they'd be in position to gain some intel on Sharp, the player, the person, and how he might fit into this Knicks roster.
Yeah, and Ian, we love hearing your audio and all your insight, but we want to see that beautiful face of yours because right now we can't see it.
You guys lost me?
Yeah, we lost you for a little bit.
It's like
while you're doing that, while you're getting that pretty face back on,
there we go.
Rafael, what is your outlook? What is your take on Sharp and how he translates to the NBA level?
I mean, the sample size is small. So I probably have seen the same amount of film as NBA teams, and anybody with synergy has probably seen the same amount of film. There's not a lot to go with. I mean, at this time last year, maybe give or take a few months, he was not even considered a top 100 high school prospect. Had a huge summer, blew up, and then it was almost like it's strategic for his camp to kind of shut him down in a sense, to maximize where the buzz around him. And so, I mean, it's a big mystery, but anybody can see that he's talented. I was actually at his pro day at the combine. He has the size, he has the athleticism, shot the ball well. So you can't help but be intrigued by the talent. Then you look at like the position that he plays, which is probably the most coveted position in the NBA, a wing that can create his own shot and shoot, dribble, and pass. And so I understand why so many teams are intrigued by him.
And make sure to check out SNY.TV all day and night for the latest from me and Begley, as well as other news and rumors, plus full coverage of the Knicks action in the first round once the pick is in. And let's say, the Knicks stay at 11, Ian. Your most recent mock draft for SNY.TV has the Knicks taking Duke forward AJ Griffin. Why does he fit the Knicks?
Yeah. So, Chris, I would say too that I did one mock draft. I'm not an updater. I know a lot of these guys like to update it every 6 hours. I did one. I'm sticking with it. AJ Griffin, I think if he is there, he's a good fit for the Knicks because they need shooting, right? They need a dynamic guard and they need shooting. And so Griffin, he gives you that, I would think, on day one in the league because of the way he shot it at Duke, because of the way he shot it for the PSA Cardinals and for Archbishop Stepanak, high school in Westchester, AAU program in the city. The shot is there and the NBA frame is there. And obviously there's a little bit of concern about injuries, but I would think that the Knicks have enough intel to feel comfortable about Griffin and the injury situation. And that's why I think if he's there and Johnny Davis is not, I would think Griffin is the guy.
Yeah,
If I'm not
I was
gonna say, if I'm not mistaken, he's represented by CAA. So if there's one team that has all the intel on AJ Griffin, it is the New York Knicks.
He is a CAA client. Obviously, his dad, Adrian Griffin, one of the top assistant coaches in the league, head coach, has been an assistant with Tom Thibodeau. But I do think that, the CAA pipeline and the Duke pipeline, between those two, I would assume that they have a good deal of information.
That'll carry weight and a lot of influence potentially. And as you mentioned, great 3-point shooter, 44%, almost 45% from three last year for Duke. Rafael, what's your outlook on Mr. AJ Griffin? Is there like a person who is a good comp for him, or like what do you feel like his ceiling is as it stands right now?
Well, I think maybe before the injuries, Jimmy Butler was the comp, and it's more so for the physical characteristics. I mean, Jimmy Butler's not shooting 45% from three. So that, as far as playing style, I think they're a little bit different. But as far as, the comp, I'd say a Jimmy Butler type frame with the strength to be able to bully smaller guards and has the strength to be able to probably defend up some positions. But it's kind of hard to say because he shot the ball so well, but I don't feel like we saw everything that he brings to the table. He started off the season injured. I feel like Duke kind of brought him along slowly and he settled into this role as a floor spacer.
Yeah.
And so if you just watch him in college, it's totally different than how he looked in high school. And so I don't have like a one-to-one comparison, but I think at the very minimum, you got a floor spacer that can be a complimentary role player.
Yeah. And that's something that, nothing to, turn your nose up. And obviously that's the thing with a lot of these prospects, guys, is, how they worked in their college system is completely different when the NBA, because everybody or all the teams have different philosophies, and it's much better when it comes to spacing. Now, we talked about, Jonathan, AJ is a great shooter, but maybe not the best defender. So how much are you concerned about that? Or are you willing to, deal with the, less than ideal defensive play, but you get the great shooting as a return?
I mean, for one, if it was just the defense, I would be a little bit more inclined to be high on him. But I other than shooting, I don't really think he did anything forget about an elite level last year in college. I mean, passing's not really there yet. I know there were some flashes of creation. But there, there's a lot that we still need to see in terms of development from his game. Where the defense is concerned, and I guess you could also translate this to how he moves on offense, but mostly defense. Is that because of the injuries? And he's had an injury every season he's played over the last 4 or 5 years, whether it's an ankle or a knee or something else. And I don't even know, what would I rather the answer be if I were the Knicks? Do I want the lack of movement on defense to be because of the injuries, or do I want it to just be because that's how he moves and does he have or his feet not, built for good mobility on the defensive end? I don't know. So it does scare me at the same time, I mean, famous last words with Kevin Knox, but he's only 18, right? So there's room to grow. And again, it's like, you could say this about all these guys. You could say it about Sharp, you could say it about Johnny Davis, you could say about all of them. What's the work ethic? Are they willing to put in the time? I mean, Jimmy Butler, boy, I would love that comp, but that guy, he's like the hardest worker the NBA has seen over the last, decade. If AJ Griffin has any part of that in him, buy all the stock you can get. Absolutely.
Yeah. You mentioned buying all the stock you can get. And obviously you already brought up Johnny Davis. Rafael, what stands out about Johnny Davis, and how does his game translate to the NBA level?
I think that's the biggest question mark about Johnny Davis is how does his game translate to the NBA level? He has like this kind of old school 90s style NBA game where it's a lot of isolation, getting the ball at the elbow. He likes to post up. I think that it can translate. He shot 38% on catch and shoots. He does move without the basketball, but he's a relentless competitor. And I think that goes a long way. I did hear a scout mention that he wasn't as high on Johnny Davis because he felt like he can only play one position, which is the two. And in today's NBA, teams are really looking for versatility, guys that can slide up and down and play multiple positions. But I think if he can get the 3-point shooting better, so at about 30%, then I think that he'll be fine. As far as like his fit with the Knicks, I think it'll be interesting, especially if he's not spacing the floor.
Yeah, I think that when you talk about Griffin or Davis and the wing guard types, you wonder how drafting one of these players impacts the current rotation. I mean, Evan Fournier is there, obviously under contract for another couple seasons. And so what does that mean for Fournier? What does it mean for the other young players the Knicks have drafted in recent years? A guy like Quentin Grimes. Obviously these guys are not similar players, but they can be used in similar positions. So how does that impact minutes for the players that you have on this roster? Fournier, I know his name has come up in some discussions regarding trades ahead of the draft. Don't know how aggressive the Knicks are in trying to move him. Don't know if it's teams asking about him, but his name has come up. But it just makes you wonder, project forward, and how a Davis or a Griffin would impact the rotation or the minutes for players that are here right now.
Yeah, that's a very good point, Ian. We actually have a comment now from Brett Fickler for Jonathan, and it says, after all the excitement of the past few days, we're just going to trade back for Ochai Agbaji, right?
Oh man, I mean, if you were asking me to put money on it right now, I would still put money on a trade back being the most likely option, because it's like, don't tell me, show me. And what has this front office shown us? They've shown us that they, I think I stole this line from someone. I apologize who I took it from, but I did it subconsciously. They value, I think, as much as anything. So, and like, obviously there's a lot of talk about how good next year's draft is. If they could pick up something in the 2023 draft and get a guy that they like, and I think they like, Agbaji. I think that, maybe if, Jalen Williams down a little bit further, who could kind of slide into that, 3-and-D role also. Someone like that, if they could go down 5, 6, 7 spots, I could see that making sense, or them doing it. I'll say that.
Right. Yeah, we've Jonathan, you said it. We've seen that move before, right? We've seen them trade back and then pick somebody up. You're probably the Brock Aller special, maybe. And so
Yeah.
They, I would assume that if there's a guy, like let's say their guys are off the board ahead of them, there's a guy that they love, they wouldn't hesitate to move back and do it to continue to collect assets. And it makes sense, as far as looking at things in the here and now. But I just wonder, like at some point, the incremental moves back to get assets and to continue to collect. At some point, it has to turn into something. So I understand the thinking. It makes sense from a value standpoint. But at some point, the chips have to be cashed in to make something happen. So if they do that tonight, yes, I think you would be a Knicks fan would understand it, would accept it. But I think you have to wonder at some point, when do all these picks, all these young players turn into a winning product?
Right. Winning product, get into the postseason and advancing, past the first round, all those things that Knicks fans desperately want. But remember, Geico Sports Night comes your way all night, every night, starting at 11, always brings tons of Knicks coverage. Tonight is obviously no different. Ian Begley and I will be reporting live from Barclays Center on the Knicks pick at number 11, if they do indeed stay there, as we're just talking about them potentially trading back in the draft. But be sure to watch Geico Sports Night all night and into the morning on SNY and the SNY app. So it's time for catch and shoot. So we're going to blow through some quick questions with quick answers. All right, Ian, you are up first. Is Jalen Brunson still a possibility to the Knicks?
Yes, but clearing that salary is going to be very difficult. And to me, if you have to attach assets like picks or young players to clear out that salary, to then bring in Brunson. I mean, it makes me put the 2021 offseason under a bigger microscope because you're trading off guys that you just signed.
Yeah. All right, Jonathan, Kyrie Irving to the Knicks. Do you want him, or are you saying, nah, we're going to pass?
Chris, you got a nice picture of a bridge behind you. I think I'd rather jump off of that than have Kyrie Irving ever wear a Knick uniform. I'll just say, look, brilliant basketball player, one of the most talented offensive, players we've ever seen. I don't know that there's a player more respected around the league for what he could do with the ball amongst his peers, and I think that means a lot. But just as far as you have a Knick organization who, in my opinion, that the culture is still being set, the foundation is still being laid to bring a guy like Irving in with all that comes with that, and we haven't even talked about the cost. Not something I want to do.
I totally understand. Totally understand it. All right, Rafael, predictions for the biggest surprise in the first round.
The biggest surprise in the first round, man, there's like three that come to mind. I think the draft could actually start at number 2, but I'll play it safe and say the biggest surprise would be Ousmane Dieng jumping into the top 8.
Ooh, okay. All right. All right.
I like it.
All right.
Interesting.
I'm gonna keep
It's just a prediction.
Right,
no intel, just a prediction.
Yeah. All right, Ian, who do you think the Knicks are more likely to hold on to? Emmanuel Quickley or Obi Toppin?
That's a really good question. It depends on what the trade is, right? If you're trading for Jaden Ivey and a team is demanding one of those two guys, I would assume Quickley would be the one in the trade because you're getting a lead guard back. And so I think it depends on what the transaction is. But in a general sense, I would think Toppin would be the one that gets held on to because he was the first high pick of this regime. And you hold on to those guys. You want it to work with those guys because of where you got them and the parameters around everything involved in making that pick. So that's where I see it.
And sticking with the young guys, Jonathan, do you want Mitchell Robinson back in a Knicks uniform this upcoming season?
All things being equal, sure. I like Mitch. It's been a while since we've had a player that has been here for longer than 4 seasons.
Mm-hmm.
So yeah, and look, Mitch is he's a quirky personality. I'm not sure that I would want to give him 4 fully guaranteed years. I would question how maybe he would respond to getting all that financial security. That said, I think he's a good basketball player. I think he could get even a little bit better. So yeah, sure, I'd like him back.
Mitch averaged 8 and 8 last year, 8 points and 8 rebounds. See if we can get that number up to double digits for both of them. But this is the first putback. Obviously, we've done it in a while, but it won't be the last. We'll have a full draft recap Friday here on SNY.TV and our social platforms. So check out the Putback with Ian Begley draft recap live tomorrow. All right, so it's time for the final thoughts. Rafael, I'll go with you first. Final predictions for Knicks on draft night.
They trade back. I don't have a player, but I believe that they're going to swing for the fences on Ivy, come up a little short, and then they're going to end up trading back.
Jonathan?
Rafael stole my answer. I'll give you a player. I think they trade back and they grab Jalen Williams. Just feels like a guy that they would want, that they could like, that they could talk themselves into. As for what they get for trading back, I don't know. Maybe it's part of a larger deal, but that would be my guess.
Yeah, I'm going to buck the trend here. I'm going to say stay at 11. And if Davis is gone, Griffin's there, they take Griffin. I think the trade back option, I think it revolves maybe around a big, and it depends on a center situation. But I think Mitchell Robinson is more likely to be back than not. And I think that plays into the trade back scenarios.
All right. Well, it's been a pleasure being with all 3 of you. So much great insight and analysis, as always. But that's going to wrap things up. Our thanks to Rafael Barlowe of NBA Big Board. Give him a follow for all his wonderful coverage on NBA Draft Night and more. And our thanks as well to Jonathan Macri. Great having him back on the show. And we'll see you tomorrow for the live draft recap. For Ian Begley, I'm Chris Williamson. Make sure to enjoy Draft Night and keep it locked to SNY and SNY.TV for your complete coverage.